the growl that sparked a challenge. The air on the distant planet felt thick with tension. The human, a lone explorer, had ventured far from his base camp, wandering through the dense, uncharted forest. The trees towered above him, their alien, branches swaying in a breeze he couldn't feel. It was quiet, too quiet. He had been searching for something, anything, that could make this journey worth it. So far, the only thing he had found were strange rock formations and plants he couldn't identify. Still, he pressed on, determined to explore this new world, no matter how unfamiliar it felt. But then, he heard it, a growl, deep, low, and unmistakable. He froze in his tracks, the sound vibrating through the ground. The human turned slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. He wasn't sure what kind of creature would make such a noise, but he knew one thing. It wasn't friendly. With his hand hovering over the weapon at his side, he took a cautious step forward, trying to peer into the darkness. That's when he saw her. A massive figure emerged from the shadows, her form towering over him. Her skin was a mix of scales and fur, and her eyes gleamed like molten gold. She was an alien, and not just any alien. She was a Beastwoman, a warrior of incredible strength. Her growl had been a warning, but the human, not fully understanding the danger, couldn't help but find it amusing. Without thinking, he laughed. The sound echoed through the clearing. "Is that all you've got?" he said, his voice carrying a hint of arrogance. "I've faced worse in the galaxy." The alien's eyes narrowed. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, she spoke. Her voice was low, deep, and full of authority. "You mock me, human?" Her words cut through the silence like a blade. "You think I am just some beast to be laughed at?" The human took a step back, realizing his mistake. But it was too late. The alien Beastwoman took a step forward, her massive frame towering over him. The ground beneath her feet seemed to tremble with every movement. "I challenge you," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of fury and something else, something deeper, something that suggested a respect for strength, even in the form of a challenge. "Prove you are worthy of your arrogance." The human swallowed hard. This wasn't just a fight. This was something else entirely. He had no idea what he had just stepped into, but the look in the Beastwoman's eyes told him one thing: there was no turning back now. He tried to laugh it off, but the fear gnawed at him. He had underestimated her, and now he had to face the consequences. This wasn't just a test of physical strength. It was a test of survival. The alien had issued a challenge that he couldn't ignore. "You'll regret this," he muttered, under his breath, though he wasn't sure if it was meant for her or himself. The Beastwoman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of someone who had seen countless warriors fall before her. "We shall see," she said. "You will prove your worth, or you will perish." Her words rang in the human's ears as she stepped back, giving him a moment to prepare. He glanced around, trying to find some way out of the situation, but the forest seemed to close in on him. There was no escape. In that moment, he realized just how wrong he had been. This was no ordinary alien. This was a creature of strength and power, someone who had likely killed before, and someone who would not hesitate to kill again. The challenge had been issued, and he had no choice but to accept. The human reached for his weapon, but the Beastwoman stopped him with a simple motion. "No weapons," she said. "This is a test of your worth. We will face each other with nothing but our strength." He nodded, reluctantly dropping his weapon to the ground. This was not going to be easy. But he had no other option. If he wanted to survive, he had to prove himself worthy of her respect, and perhaps just maybe earn her trust. The alien Beastwoman stepped back, standing tall and regal in the midst of the alien jungle. She was ready. But was he? The human took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The challenge had begun, and in that moment he realized something. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something much deeper, a chance to prove himself in the eyes of a creature who had seen it all. He would not back down. He couldn't. Not now. Not when the challenge was so much bigger than just him. With one final glance at the Beastwoman, he squared his shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. The first move was hers. The test begins. The wind picked up, stirring the strange leaves of the alien trees and filling the air with the sound of distant whispers. The human stood tall, his pulse quickening as the alien Beastwoman loomed before him. His heart raced, but his mind was already sharpening, ready for whatever came next. He had made a mistake mocking her growl, but now he had to prove himself worthy. No longer just a traveler lost in a foreign land, he was a challenger in the eyes of the Beastwoman, and he knew there was no turning back. She moved first. With a fluid motion, the Beastwoman grabbed a strange device from her side, a weapon that glowed with an eerie blue light. The human flinched at the sight of it, but she didn't raise it to strike. Instead, she gestured to the ground before them, and a massive circle of light appeared, glowing faintly in the darkness. "This," she said, her voice calm but with an unmistakable force behind it, "is the beginning of your test. The trials will challenge your body and mind. You must survive each one if you want to prove yourself worthy." The human stepped forward, eyes fixed on the glowing circle. Something about the light felt different. It wasn't just the glow that gave off an unnatural chill. It was as if the very air around the circle bent and twisted, almost alive with energy. He had no idea what it was, but he knew one thing. It was the first trial. He was already committed. "Step inside," she commanded, her eyes narrowing, "and we will begin." Without hesitation, the human stepped into the circle. As soon as he did, the ground beneath his feet rumbled and the air seemed to vibrate with energy. He glanced back at the Beastwoman, but she wasn't watching him. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for something. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world shifted. The human stumbled, his senses bombarded by an overwhelming pressure. The landscape around him seemed to distort, stretching and twisting as if the very fabric of reality was being pulled apart. The air grew heavy, and an eerie silence fell. It was as though he was no longer standing on solid ground, but floating somewhere between two dimensions. His heart pounded. Was this part of the trial? Was this some kind of test for his endurance? A whisper came from behind him, faint but unmistakable. He whipped around, but no one was there. His eyes darted across the shifting landscape. He couldn't trust his senses anymore. Everything around him was an illusion, a carefully constructed world that seemed to respond to his every thought, every fear. "You must confront it." The Beastwoman's voice echoed through the chaos. "Or it will consume you." The human gritted his teeth and steadied himself. He had faced strange enemies and bizarre situations before, but this was something else. This wasn't a fight against a creature or a physical challenge. This was a battle against his own mind. As if on cue, the ground cracked open before him, and out of the fissures crawled shadowy figures, his deepest fears brought to life. They were manifestations of every mistake he had ever made, every regret he had buried deep inside. Some were small, insignificant memories that made him cringe. Others were far darker, moments where he had failed those who trusted him, moments where he had chosen selfishness over loyalty. The first shadow lunged at him, its form barely more than a silhouette of his past failures. He swung out instinctively, his fist connecting with the figure, but it only dissipated into smoke, vanishing as if it was never there. More figures appeared, more fearsome than the last. Each one was an echo of something from his past, something that weighed heavily on him. They didn't fight back, though. They just watched, waiting for him to confront them. The human struggled to breathe, his chest tightening. Sweat formed on his brow, and his mind raced. He wanted to run, to escape. But he knew better. The Beastwoman had made it clear. If he couldn't face this challenge, he wouldn't survive the trials. And if he failed here, he would never earn her respect. He took a deep breath and focused. "I've faced worse," he muttered, clenching his fists. He reached for the shadows, for the regrets, and in that moment he realized something. These fears, these figures, they weren't real. They were just reflections of his past, things he had long buried. He could control them, and he had to. With a sudden burst of energy, he surged forward. His fists flew, but this time they weren't just punches. They were the culmination of every lesson he had learned, every moment of strength he had found in his life. He fought not just to survive, but to prove to himself that he was worthy of the challenge, worthy of the respect he had so foolishly mocked. The shadows recoiled as he struck them. Each blow shattered them, sending them into nothingness. Slowly, the world around him began to settle. The twisting landscape, the illusions, it all faded, leaving him standing in the center of the glowing circle. For a moment, he thought he had won. But then, he heard her voice again, colder this time. "You've done well, human," the Beastwoman said, her figure materializing at the edge of the circle. Her gaze was sharp, unblinking. "But this is only the beginning. You've proven you can fight your fears, but now we will see if you have the strength to survive what comes next." The human stood tall, his breath heavy but steady. His heart was still racing, but his resolve was stronger than ever. He had faced his inner demons, and survived. But the Beastwoman was right. This was only the beginning, and the real test was yet to come. The first trial, strength versus the beast. The air was thick with anticipation. The strange swirling energy from the previous trial still lingered in the human's body, and he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was racing, processing everything that had just happened. He had faced his fears, stood tall, and survived the mental torment. But this was different. He could feel the ground trembling beneath his feet, the subtle vibration growing stronger with each passing. Second, the Beastwoman stood before him, her gaze unwavering, her posture poised like a predator about to strike. "Now, you will face the first true trial," she said, her voice calm yet filled with an undeniable force. "This is not a test of your mind, human. This is a test of your strength." The human's eyes narrowed as she stepped aside, revealing a massive stone structure. It looked ancient, worn by time and battle, but still standing firm. Embedded into the stone was a large, thick chain, nearly as big as his entire body. It was wrapped around a colossal stone pillar, but from the way it pulsed with energy, the human could tell it was more than just an old relic. "You must break the chain," the Beastwoman continued, her eyes gleaming with something like amusement. "Only then will you have earned the right to move forward." The human felt a flicker of doubt, but he quickly pushed it aside. This was the challenge, strength against strength. He had been through physical trials before, but nothing like this. This chain wasn't just metal. It felt alive, imbued with a strange power. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he had no choice. He had come too far to back down now. He moved toward the chain, his muscles tightening as he prepared for the battle ahead. His hands wrapped around the thick links, feeling the pulse of energy coursing through them. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a powerful, almost electric force that resisted his every pull. He gritted his teeth, pulling with all his might. But the chain didn't budge. His body strained, his veins popping from the effort. But the chain remained as unyielding as the stone pillar it was anchored to. Frustration welled up inside him. He had faced enemies stronger than this. He had fought in wars, survived brutal battles, but this was different. The chain wasn't just an obstacle, it was a test. It was as if it was judging him, measuring his worth. The Beastwoman watched silently, her expression unreadable. She said nothing, but her eyes never left him. He could feel the weight of her gaze, heavy with expectation. "Why won't it move?" he muttered under his breath. "What am I missing?" A sharp laugh echoed from the Beastwoman. "You are trying to fight it with your strength alone," she said, her voice low and knowing. "You cannot overcome this trial with muscle alone. You must use your mind, your willpower. The chain responds to the force of your determination, not just the strength of your body." Her words hit him like a slap. He had been so focused on the physical battle that he had overlooked the most important part. This wasn't just about power. It was about his resolve. He stepped back, his breath heavy as he studied the chain. His hand still tingled with the energy from the links, but now he saw something else. A subtle, almost imperceptible pulse that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. The chain was alive, responding to him in some way. It was testing him, pushing him to understand its nature. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He had to focus. He had to let go of his anger, his frustration. He had to clear his mind. The Beastwoman was right. This wasn't just about physical strength. It was about the strength of his will. The human relaxed his muscles and focused, feeling the chain's pulse align with his own. He stretched out his arms as if reaching for something beyond the physical world. He imagined the chain's energy flowing into him, not as something to be fought, but as something to be understood. And then, just as suddenly as the tension had built, something shifted. He reached out with his mind, gently grasping the pulse of the chain. His entire body relaxed, and for the first time since he had started the challenge, he felt something give way. The chain's resistance weakened, almost as if it was testing him, letting him understand its force, its purpose. He pulled again, but this time it wasn't just muscle. It was his will, his focus, his determination. Slowly, steadily, the chain began to loosen, its massive links grinding against the stone with a sound that reverberated through the air like thunder. He gritted his teeth as he gave one final pull, and with a resounding crack, the chain snapped, free. The human stood panting, his heart racing, his body aching from the effort. But he had done it. The chain was broken. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Beastwoman stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with something like approval. "You have passed the first trial," she said, her voice filled with a strange mix of admiration and respect. "But do not grow complacent. This was only the beginning. The trials will only grow harder from here." The human wiped the sweat from his brow, nodding in agreement. He had expected the physical challenge to be hard, but this was something else. The chain had been a test of strength, yes, but it had also been a test of his resolve, his mind, and his spirit. And he had passed. But the Beastwoman was right. This was only the beginning. As he looked up, he saw her eyes shift, and a new sense of purpose filled the air. The next trial was coming. And this time it would be even more dangerous. The human wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. He was ready. The chain had been broken, but the real challenge had only just begun. Facing fears. The mind game. The moment the chain shattered, a new silence fell over the clearing. The human stood at the center, his chest heaving with exhaustion, sweat dripping down his brow. He had broken the chain, passed the first trial, but as he wiped his face, he couldn't shake the feeling that something far more dangerous was waiting just beyond the horizon. His victory, hard-won as it was, felt hollow. The Beastwoman's sharp eyes studied him for a moment before she spoke, her voice colder than before. "You have proven your strength, but strength alone is not enough." She stepped forward, her movements deliberate, calculated. The human's muscles tensed instinctively. What now? Without another word, she gestured to the ground before him. The stone beneath his feet trembled and the air seemed to shift, warping in strange patterns. Slowly, a swirling mist began to rise, enveloping the area. It was thick and disorienting, but it wasn't the mist that caught his attention. It was the way the landscape around him began to change. The once familiar clearing with its towering trees and dense foliage was gone. Instead, he found himself standing at the edge of a vast, dark abyss. The ground was cracked and jagged, as if torn apart by some ancient cataclysm. In the distance, shapes moved in the shadows, too quick and too faint to be clearly seen. "This is your next trial," the Beastwoman's voice echoed, coming from all directions. "You must face what lies within your mind. Only by conquering your greatest fears will you prove your true strength." A cold shiver ran down his spine. The first trial had been physical. He could handle that. But this was different. The mind was a far more dangerous battlefield. The ground beneath his feet shifted again, and suddenly the abyss deepened, swallowing the entire landscape. He stumbled forward, panic rising, but it was too late. The mist grew thicker, and with it the darkness seemed to close in. For a moment the human stood motionless, his breath shallow, his heart hammered in his chest, louder than it had ever been. He could feel his body react, his mind struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. Then, the first fear appeared. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall and imposing. It was a reflection of his past, a past he had buried deep inside. It was his younger self standing there, helpless and broken, drenched in sweat, eyes filled with fear. "Do you remember me?" the figure sneered. "Do you remember the times you failed when it mattered most?" The human's breath caught in his throat. This was a nightmare. But it wasn't just any nightmare. It was real. He could feel the sting of past failures, of lost opportunities, of all the times he had failed others, failed himself. The figure of his past moved closer, a cruel smile twisting its features. "You've never been strong enough. You couldn't save her. You couldn't protect those who needed you. You've always been weak." He staggered back, the weight of those words crushing him. He had failed. The memories rushed back, flashing in his mind's eye like a flickering light. The people he had lost, the promises he had broken, the mistakes he could never undo. He closed his eyes, trying to push it all away, but it was no use. The darkness inside him, the regret, the guilt, it was all too real. His past was here, staring, him in the face. He had no escape. Then the voice of the Beastwoman cut through the fog, cold and commanding. "Face it, human. Accept your failure. Only then can you move past it." Her words were a blow to his chest. How could he face something so painful? How could he confront the ghosts of his past when they threatened to swallow him whole? He took a step back, shaking his head. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I've moved past this. I'm not that person anymore." But his younger self laughed, an evil, mocking laugh that echoed through the abyss. "You'll always be that person," it taunted. "You'll never change." The human's fists clenched at his sides. No, he couldn't accept this. He couldn't let his past define him. He had come too far to let this break him. He was stronger now. He had proven it. He straightened his back, pushing back against the rising tide of doubt and guilt. "I am not who I was. I've learned. I've grown." With each word, the figure of his younger self began to fade, flickering like a shadow at dawn. His fears, his regrets, they began to lose their grip on him. And then, just as the figure of his past dissolved into the mist, another fear appeared, this one far more insidious. From the shadows, a new shape emerged, a figure in the form of someone he had trusted, someone he had failed in the worst way. It was the face of a former comrade, someone he had promised to protect but had ultimately let down. "You think you can fix your mistakes now?" the figure hissed, its eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. "You think you can undo everything you've done? You can't save me, and you never will." The human's heart tightened. This was the real wound, the one that had haunted him for years, the knowledge that he had failed when someone depended on him most. He had been too late, too weak to make a difference. But then, a strange calm washed over him. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose how to move forward. The only way to break free from these fears was to confront them, to accept that he was human, flawed, yes, but capable of growth. "I can't change the past," he said, his voice steady now, stronger than before. "But I can choose how to live. I can learn. I can be better." As he spoke, the figure of his comrade flickered, its form disintegrating into mist. The abyss around him seemed to recede, the darkness fading as his fears lost their power. The Beastwoman's voice, now softer but still filled with authority, echoed through the now clear space. "You have passed the second trial, human. You have faced your fears and survived. The human stood there, breathing heavily but standing tall. His heart was still racing, but he no longer felt the crushing weight of his past. He had faced it, accepted it, and pushed beyond it. But even as the fog lifted and the trial ended, he knew the Beastwoman's words had been true. The trials would only grow harder from here. He had proven his strength. He had proven his resolve. But there was more to come, and he was ready. Betrayal. Within the challenge, the mist from the previous trial still hung in the air, its presence lingering like a memory that refused to fade. The human stood at the edge of a new, unfamiliar landscape, his body sore from the mental and physical trials he had already endured. His mind was still racing from the intense confrontation with his deepest fears, but now, in the quiet aftermath, he felt a strange sense of unease. It was as though the calm before the storm was not truly calm at all. The Beastwoman stood to his side, her presence silent and imposing as always. She seemed to be watching him, her gaze never wavering, her sharp eyes studying his every movement. "You've passed the second trial," she said, her voice a low murmur, barely above a whisper. "But you must know that not all challenges come from within. Some are far more treacherous." The human frowned, confusion creeping into his thoughts. What did she mean by that? Was there another trial waiting, or worse, had the trial somehow begun to change, turning into something even darker? Before he could voice his questions, the ground beneath them rumbled violently, shaking the air around them. The earth cracked open with an ear-splitting sound, sending a spray of dust and rocks into the air. The human stumbled, barely able to keep his balance. His heart raced again, but this time it wasn't from fear of himself. It was the overwhelming sensation of something coming, something far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. Out of the fissure in the ground emerged figures, strange, armored creatures with glowing eyes and weapons in hand. Their movements were quick, calculated, and their faces hidden behind dark visors. The human's breath caught in his throat. These weren't part of the trials. They were enemies. The Beastwoman remained still, her gaze fixed on the approaching invaders, her expression unreadable. The human instinctively reached for his weapon, but she raised a hand, stopping him. "Not yet," she said, her voice still calm, though there was a flicker of something, perhaps concern, in her eyes. "They are not here to fight you directly. They are here for something far more valuable." The human turned to her, confusion deepening. What could these invaders possibly want? They had nothing to gain by attacking him, not unless they had their sights set on something bigger. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "What do they want?" The Beastwoman's eyes flashed briefly, an emotion he had never seen. Before crossing her features, was it fear? "They are the Zalthari," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper. "A ruthless faction that seeks to manipulate the trials. They want you." The human's heart skipped a beat. "Me?" "Yes," she replied, her voice cold now. "They've been watching you. They think that by taking you, they can control the outcome of the trials. They believe you hold the key to the next phase of their conquest." The human's confusion shifted into dread. He had come to this planet expecting nothing more than a series of physical and mental challenges. But now it seemed that the trials had drawn attention from forces far beyond what he had imagined. The Zalthari advanced, and the Beastwoman moved to intercept them, her movements swift and graceful. But the human could see that something was off. She wasn't attacking them. She wasn't even moving to fight. She was waiting. "Why aren't you fighting back?" the human asked, his voice sharp with frustration. "Why are you just standing there?" The Beastwoman turned her gaze to him, her eyes dark with something that could almost be described as regret. "Because I cannot." Her words hit him like a slap, but before he could process them, the Zalthari soldiers spread out, forming a semicircle around the two of them. They were closing in, their weapons raised, eyes glinting with malicious intent. The human's heart was pounding. He didn't have time to wonder what the Beastwoman had meant by, "I cannot." He reached for his weapon, determined to defend himself. But before he could even pull it from its holster, one of the Zalthari soldiers struck. The blow was fast and brutal, The human didn't see it coming. He only felt the impact of the soldier's fist crashing into his side, sending him stumbling backward. The world spun, but he managed to regain his footing just in time to see another soldier charge toward him. "Fight, human!" the Beastwoman barked, her voice now filled with urgency. But as the human turned to face the soldier, he noticed that her attention wasn't on the fight. She was looking past him, her eyes locked on something he couldn't see. Before he could react, the soldier lunged at him, their weapon raised. In that split second, a memory flashed in his mind, his past mistakes, his failures. He wasn't fast enough. He wasn't strong enough. Not again, not now. He felt the sharp sting of the weapon slicing through the air, and for a moment everything seemed to slow down. But just as the blow was about to land, the Beastwoman moved with inhuman speed, stepping between them and intercepting the strike. Her body absorbed the force and she collapsed to one knee, gasping for air. "Why did you?" the human started, but the Beastwoman's eyes met his with an intense gaze. "You were never meant to face this alone," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "But you have to make a choice now." The Zalthari soldiers advanced, their weapons raised, and the human realized with a sudden jolt that he had no choice but to fight. But something had changed. The betrayal wasn't just from the soldiers. The real betrayal was deeper. Something inside him. For a moment he hesitated. His mind was torn between helping the Beastwoman, facing these invaders, and confronting the fact that he had underestimated the true scale of the trials. He had trusted that the trials would be straightforward, physical, mental, but now everything was turning against him. The Zalthari had manipulated the challenge, and the Beastwoman's loyalty was in question. "Make your move," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "You cannot afford to be weak now." The human's gaze hardened. He wasn't going to fail again. The choice was clear. He would survive. He would fight for everything he had learned, everything he had earned in this brutal trial. But to survive this, to break free from the web of betrayal, he would need to make the hardest choice of all: trust his instincts or lose everything. With that decision, the human surged forward, determination setting his every move alight. The Zalthari soldiers would not win. Not today. But even as he fought, a small voice whispered in the back of his mind. The trials were far from over. This was just the beginning. A bond forms, the hidden truth. The battle had ended. The clash with the Zalthari soldiers, intense and unforgiving, had left the human breathless, his body battered but not broken. His heart was still racing, his mind buzzing with the chaos of the fight. He had fought hard, and somehow he had survived. But even as the last of the invaders lay unconscious on the ground, a new weight pressed heavily on his chest. The Beastwoman had been injured in the fray, her powerful frame weakening from the blow she had taken to protect him. She had stepped in at the last possible moment, but her actions had come at a cost, one that the human couldn't ignore. She had collapsed to one knee, struggling to stay upright as her chest rose and fell with labored breaths. The human rushed to her side, his heart clenching at the sight of her pain. She had protected him, fought beside him, and now she was paying the price. "Don't," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, her strength waning. This is my choice, human." He knelt beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "No," he said, his voice low and filled with something that bordered on desperation. "You're hurt. Let me help you." For the first time, the Beastwoman looked up at him with something other than the cold, impassive gaze she had worn throughout. The trials. There was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something softer but fleeting. "You cannot save me," she said quietly, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "Not like this." The human's mind raced. He had already seen what she was capable of, her strength, her resilience. But this was different. She was vulnerable, and that vulnerability was something he hadn't prepared for. "I don't care about the trials anymore," he said firmly, his voice carrying a sense of finality. You protected me. You fought for me when you didn't have to. I owe you more than I can repay, and I'm not leaving you here like this." The Beastwoman's expression shifted, her lips pressing into a tight line. She wanted to protest. Wanted to push him away as she had done so many times before. But something in his gaze stopped her. It wasn't just pity or gratitude that he was offering. It was something else, something deeper, something that made her question the walls she had built around herself. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the space between them thick with unspoken words. Then, slowly, the Beastwoman let out a soft sigh. "You don't understand," she murmured. "I am not like you. I have fought alone for so long. I have never relied on anyone." The human's hand tightened on her shoulder, grounding her in the present. "You don't have to anymore. You don't have to fight alone." There was a silence between them, a heavy pause that seemed to stretch on forever. The Beastwoman seemed torn, her mind at war with itself. She had spent so long living in solitude, believing that dependence on others would only lead to weakness. But here, in this moment, something had shifted. She didn't know why, but the human's words, his unwavering trust, had broken through her armor, just enough for her to feel something other than survival. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "You've proven yourself, you've passed the trials. Why stay?" The human's expression softened, and for a moment, the warrior's hard exterior faltered. "Because we're in this together now. I'm not leaving you behind. Not after everything you've done for me." Her eyes flickered with a mixture of disbelief and something she couldn't quite place. Her pride, her stoic nature, wanted to reject his words, wanted to push him away, but she couldn't. Not anymore. "Stay," she said finally, her voice rough, as if the simple word took effort to say. "Stay with me then. But know this, human. The trials are not over. There will be more. The Zalthari are not the only threat you will face." He nodded, his resolve hardening. "I'm ready." But even as he said the words, the weight of her warning pressed down on him. He had already faced so much, physically, mentally, emotionally. But the trials had only just begun, and if the Zalthari were any indication, things were about to get even more dangerous. "You're not ready for this," she warned, her voice low and serious. "The trials will test you in ways you cannot imagine. There is power within these lands, power that you are not yet prepared to face." The human's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What kind of power?" But the Beastwoman's eyes darkened, and she looked away, as if the answer was too painful to give. "I am bound to this place," she said quietly. "And so are you now. The trials are not just for your survival, they are for something much greater. And you are part of it." The human's brow furrowed as he tried to process her words. Something much greater? Was this just about proving his worth? Or was there something else, something hidden in the trials, that neither of them fully understood? The Beastwoman seemed to sense his confusion. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on his arm, her grip tighter than expected. "I've never told anyone this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you need to know. These trials were not meant for just anyone. They were meant for the one who could change the fate of this world, and that one is you." The words hung in the air like a storm, crackling with the weight of prophecy, of destiny. The human blinked, his mind reeling from the revelation. He had thought the trials were just a way to prove his strength, but this was something entirely different. "Change the fate of this world?" he repeated, disbelief and confusion battling in his chest. "What do you mean? How am I supposed to do that?" But the Beastwoman didn't answer. She only looked at him with something like regret in her eyes. "The truth will come in time," she said softly. "But for now we must prepare. The next trial is closer than you think." The human stood up, his body sore but his mind sharp. His connection to the Beastwoman had shifted. They were no longer just allies in a deadly game. Something deeper had formed between them, something unspoken but undeniable. But But as she had warned, the trials were not over, and they were far from the end. With the Beastwoman by his side, the human felt a surge of strength, of purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt ready to face. He had already survived so much, and whatever came next, he would face it head-on with a newfound bond between him and the warrior who had fought beside him. The final test, proving worth. The moment had arrived. The human stood at the precipice of his journey, surrounded by the remnants of the trials that had torn him apart and rebuilt him stronger. His body was bruised, his spirit scarred, but he was no longer the same man who had stepped into this world weeks ago. He had faced his fears, fought through his doubts, and survived against all odds. But the Beastwoman's words echoed in his mind. This was not the end. The final trial loomed before him, and there was no turning back. Beside him, the Beastwoman stood tall, her wounds healed but her expression unreadable. She had been with him from the beginning, guiding him, protecting him, and now she was the one who needed protection. He had grown close to her, trusted her, and in return, she had entrusted him with the truth. The truth about the trials, about the fate of this world, and about the power he now held in his hands. But even now, as they approached the last trial, he knew the most difficult choice was yet to come. The ground beneath them trembled as if the planet itself was aware of what was to come. The air grew thick with an unseen pressure, the atmosphere heavy with the promise of something dangerous. The Beastwoman turned to him, her golden eyes locking with his in a moment of silent understanding. "The final test is not one of strength or skill," she said, her voice calm but laced with a hidden tension. "It is a test of heart." The human's brow furrowed. "Heart?" "Yes," she replied, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "What you must face will challenge your very soul. You will be tested by everything you fought for, by everything you've become, and it will not be easy." He glanced around, looking for any sign of the trial. The landscape around them was still, eerily silent. The remnants of the Zalthari invasion were gone, but he knew they were still lurking somewhere in the shadows. He had seen the devastation they could bring, and the thought of facing them again made his heart race. But this time he was different. This time he would face whatever came with eyes wide open. The Beastwoman's gaze softened as she spoke again. "This world has a history, a deep, ancient power. The trials were not just meant for you, they were meant to awaken something that has been dormant for millennia." The human took a deep breath, trying to make sense of her words. "What is this power? What does it mean?" "You will understand soon enough," she said cryptically. "But know this, the final trial will not only test your ability to survive, it will test your resolve, your choices, and your willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good." Before he could respond, the ground before them split open with a deafening roar. The earth cracked like glass, and from the depths of the rift, a swirling vortex of dark energy began to form. It twisted and spiraled, pulling the very air into its core, its depths a void of endless darkness. A voice, low and echoing, like thunder, bellowed from within the vortex. "Human, you have come far, but now you must face the greatest challenge of all. The time has come for you to prove your worth, or perish in the darkness." The Beastwoman stood still, her eyes narrowing as the vortex swirled violently. "This is the final test," she said, her voice filled with a mix of warning and something deeper, something almost resigned. "The darkness that lies within the core of this world, it is ancient, powerful, and it feeds on your doubts, your fears, and your greatest weakness." The human swallowed hard. He had faced physical trials, mental trials, and even the deepest fears of his past. But this was different. This was not just an enemy he could fight or outsmart. This was something that would challenge his very soul. The vortex began to pulsate, sending waves of energy through the ground. The air grew cold, and the human could feel the darkness pulling at him, trying to drag him in. It was like a force, from beyond, a gravitational pull that threatened to swallow him whole. "You must enter," the Beastwoman said, her voice unwavering. "Only you can face what lies within." The human hesitated. He had no idea what awaited him in that darkness. But the Beastwoman's gaze was firm, and her words echoed in his mind. "This world, this trial, is bigger than both of us. You are the key. You must pass or the world will fall into chaos." With a final breath, the human stepped forward, walking into the swirling vortex. The world around him twisted and shifted, like a nightmare coming to life. He could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on him, clouding his mind with doubt and fear. For a moment it felt as though he was drowning in it, lost in the void, swallowed by the darkness. But then, a light, faint at first, but growing stronger with each step, began to shine ahead of him. It was a beacon, a small spark in the overwhelming darkness. He moved toward it, every part of him pulling away from the shadows that clawed at his legs, his heart racing as the light grew brighter. The voice boomed again, this time more forceful, more insistent. "You are weak, human. You have failed. You will never be worthy. The darkness will consume you." The human clenched his fists, forcing himself to push through the fear, the doubt, the overwhelming sense of failure. He had come this far. He had survived every trial, faced every challenge. He had proven himself before, and he would prove himself again. "I will not fail," he muttered through gritted teeth. "I won't." The light ahead of him grew brighter until it engulfed him completely. In that moment, the darkness shattered, and he was thrown into a blinding white light. For a long, disorienting second, he couldn't see, couldn't breathe. But then, the light faded, and he found himself standing in the center of a vast, open space. Before him stood a massive stone altar, carved with intricate symbols he didn't recognize. At the altar stood a figure he recognized. It was the Beastwoman, but this was not the warrior he had known. This was something different, something, more. She stood tall and regal, her body glowing with a strange, ethereal energy. Her eyes were filled with an ancient wisdom, and her presence exuded power, not as a warrior, but as something far older, far more profound. "You have proven your worth," she said, her voice now soft, but filled with an immense, timeless power. "You have passed the trials. You have earned the right to reshape the future." The human stood frozen, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. What is this place? What's happening? "This is the heart of the world," the Beastwoman explained, her form now radiating light. "This is where the power of the trials comes from, and now it belongs to you." The human felt a strange sensation pulse through his body, a surge of energy unlike anything he had ever felt before. It was power, yes, but also something else, something ancient, something primal. He was no longer just a man who had survived the trials. He was now bound to this world, to its fate. He was the key to its future. But what did that mean? Before he could ask, the Beastwoman's gaze softened. "You have a choice," she said quietly. "The fate of this world rests in your hands. Will you lead it toward salvation, or will you let it fall into the darkness?" The human's heart pounded in his chest. He had made it this far, but the final test wasn't just about survival. It was about the future. His future. The world's future. The pressure of the choice weighed on him, but for the first time in his journey, he knew what he had to do. With steady hands, he stepped forward, ready to accept the burden, the power, and the responsibility that came with it. The trials had tested him in ways he never imagined. But this was the final trial, the test of his heart. And he was ready.